This is a podcast about our lived experience, which unfortunately includes infant death and subsequent mental health struggles. Please take good care of yourself and only listen if this content feels safe for you right now. We'll still be here when you're ready.
Hi, I'm Judith.
And I'm Alina. We are internet friends turned real-life friends who both experienced the tragic loss of our sons to sudden infant death syndrome in winter of 2021.
In the year after Aiden died, my husband and I both became unemployed. My parents divorced, and we had to move 5 times for various reasons.
And as for me, just a few weeks before my son Quinn died, my then husband had come out to me as a transgender woman and were subsequently divorcing.
It's been a lot.
It's been a lot.
But as long as we're living, we will love our sons deeply and work to make sure that we live a life that makes them proud.
Welcome to As Long As I'm Living podcast.
We're so glad you're here.
Hey everybody, Alina here. This is our follow-up second interview with Katie, Zayn's mom of Breathing After Loss. You may remember Katie from a couple of weeks ago. Our first interview with her was called Breathing After Loss, and she and Judith talked about the struggles of having an alive baby after a dead baby, why they don't fit in with mom groups, and so much more. If you haven't listened to that episode, we have it linked in the description, so make sure you click through and listen to that one first. And I'm going to put this warning on this again. I put it on the first one too. This is a triggering topic for a lot of people. If you're like me and you don't have a living baby in your arms, I know listening to parents of living children complain can be really hard. And so we encourage you to skip this episode. If that is something that's going to hurt your heart, come back and see us next week. It's really, really fine. That said, I've listened to these episodes and I don't find them particularly triggering. So if you're on the fence, you can always give it a shot. And remember, you can stop listening. If it's making you feel bad, please stop listening. We ask you, please. Anyway, we hope you enjoy this episode. Even I enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much to Katie for coming on the podcast. And thank you to Judith for taking this one on her own. I really appreciate it.
What I do know is that grief takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. And the minute you have this baby, you have a lot less energy and a lot less time. So how do you feel about grieving while parenting?
The ways that this my son dying has made me a better mother to Anwar are very different in the ways that it has caused me to struggle in my motherhood that I wouldn't have previously. Because when you become a mom, a parent, dad, whatever you prefer to call yourself, it is like a shock to your system. It is the most exhausting thing you will experience, taking care of newborn. All of a sudden, this little baby is dependent on you. And we're already starting from like negative 1,000, where you are experienced so much trauma and grief that it is physically exhausting and has impacted your physical body. And during that time, you're pregnant and then you have a baby. And for me, what I experienced was I just did not even have the energy. I didn't have a lot of energy. For me, one of the worst things about the newborn stage in my second son is I suffered from like debilitating insomnia. I've had that since Zayn died. And that really impacted my experience the first maybe like 4 months of my second son's life. And that made me very bitter because I was only experiencing that because my son died. Yeah. And so there's a lot of ways where, I've become like a better mother, but like it's really hindered my experiences and taken away from it. It's like secondary losses all over again.
Yeah. I think that's probably right. I also know that for me, I spent a lot of time when I didn't have a daughter. I spent a lot of time like just being debilitated, and I don't have that choice right now. I don't have the option to sleep in late. I don't have the option to lay on the floor for hours. I don't have the option to forget things. I don't have the option to just be irresponsible and like just lose myself in the moment. I have to be responsible. I have to be alert. I have to be present. I have to wake up in the morning and early. And I think that my grief has maybe the growth and the progress of my grief has slowed since I've given birth.
I agree, because you don't almost, and I remember it was funny because I heard this when Zayn died, a lot of the families I talked to would experience that when they lose a child while they already have living children, they feel like they don't have a lot of space to grieve
Yeah.
because, your 4-year-old needs attention and you
Yeah.
can't sit in bed all day. And, I really related to that after my second son was born because, like you said, this baby needs you, and you don't necessarily get the time that you can commit to just sitting with your grief, or even stuff like attending therapy, going on trips or whatever you're doing for your grief, like support groups. It's like, well, is that what does my baby need? And then also, I don't find you have the space, and I hope maybe some of your listeners have, supportive loved ones in their life that can kind of grasp at the concept of grieving and being happy at the same time. But most people just think everything's fine.
Yeah.
When your child died, it's like everybody's there and they understand why you're sad, maybe to not the extent. But then when another child,
They're
is
like, why aren't you
born,
better?
yeah, like at least you have this kid now.
It's like the grief is almost even more invisible. People forget about it. And so they have, I think, like less patience. They're like just less understanding about the fact that you're actively grieving. I think they just assume that you're all better. And it's really hard to be fighting and be like, no, I'm not better. Like, I need your empathy. I need your patience. I need help. I'm drowning. When everyone's like, look, you have a baby, all better now. It almost makes it worse in some ways than when you, I will always choose having an alive child over having no alive children. I'm just saying it makes the grieving, like, it makes the interactions with other people worse. That part.
It definitely makes it more complicated.
Yeah, more complicated.
And it's hard too, because it can make you feel like nobody cares anymore. Because you feel like you have even, you're already starting from such a slim baseline for the average person of having space to grieve and talk about their child. And, when you have another one that comes into the picture, or existing children, like focus on your other kids.
Yeah.
And it's like that gets even smaller and smaller, and it's so isolating. That's where community is really important, and finding community of people who are experiencing this as well, because that can be really hard. And then, not having an understanding of why holidays are still hard for you,
Yes. Or like even, okay, this is a perfect example you and I just talked about, like birthdays. So our children are turning 1, and it's very hard because you compare what everybody is doing for one of your children's birthday, but not the other. Yes. Meaning, for my alive daughter's birthday, the whole family is coming to town. Everyone wants to be there, all the good things. For my dead son's birthday, it's like a different feeling. Some of my family comes to town, but it's just it's a different feeling. Not all of them do. No, not everyone reaches out. People kind of are more eager to forget about that. And I can see, for the dead child, they don't bring gifts. But for the live child, they all bring gifts. And I get it. Obviously, a dead baby does not need gifts. But to me, I love each of my children equally. And I want each of my children to have a happy birthday, a celebratory birthday. I almost feel like I had to make a birthday cake for both my kids. Because if I did it for one, I had to do it for the other. Even though one is dead. But it's very hard for me to see what everyone's willing to do for one, and I have to fight for just a little space for the other.
And it's hard to communicate that in a way that is not taking away from the child that they're celebrating, because you're trying to explain that, yes, you love the second child and you are so happy that they are getting celebrated, and you want, the child that died to be celebrated, right? Yes. And I see that a lot around Christmas time, with families wanting stockings for the babies that died and the babies that are living. Can be, again, really challenging. I was talking on my Instagram account. My 2 sons were born about a week apart, so 6 days, and we're currently planning a birthday party. And I have to make sure the dates, don't get too close together, because it's taking away from one, and just trying to explain those feelings. Why I'm feeling so complicated. It's like, well, it's their birthday. You should be just like, focus on the birthday that, his birthday that you're celebrating. It's like, well, it's not that simple for me. And then also all the complicated feelings it is for like planning, this birthday that maybe the other child never got to have. And It's hard.
My in-laws, like my mother-in-law likes to send out an email to the entire family for like everyone's birthday, all the cousins and whatever. It's like an email and then everyone texts. But she doesn't do that for Aiden. But she will do it for my daughter. And my mother-in-law has only the best of intentions, but it's very hurtful when there's such a clear-cut comparison. And the comparison is so close to one another because our children were born so close to one another. I also think part of it is that I feel like I see two children everywhere. I see both my son and my daughter everywhere. And it feels like I'm looking at an invisible friend. And I feel like it's like, why am I the only one in this room that see two kids? Everyone else sees one kid and I always see two.
And that is really hard because there may be people that actually just see you as a mom to one child.
I think that there are some people who, at the heart of their hearts, they do. And they do not understand why I keep pushing for Aiden, why I keep pushing to include him, why I keep pushing to talk about him, why I keep pushing.
Or they forget, which is so hurtful because I genuinely feel sometimes people forget that you have another child. And it's interesting that you share that experience as well, because when Zayn died, I was so focused on the fact that people were treating me this way because they never met him, is because he died like right before his due date.
But I feel the same way.
And that's what I had heard. And I have heard this from women who have experienced like miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth. Even interestingly, I have a very close lost mom friend who she's lost her daughter, and her brother also died before she had her loss. And she's even told me her mother has experienced something similar, and her brother was like in his 20s when he died. And so this is like a universal experience. And it's just it more reasons why it gets isolating, and it's hard. It changes relationships, and it's complicated.
Did I tell you about how I went to the mall maybe a month ago at this time, and there was this like little boy playing with my daughter like in the tunnel, and I took a picture of this random strange kid playing with my kid, and I just stare at it all the time. And I look at this picture and I love this picture and I treasure this picture of this perfect stranger boy that I will never see again, that I don't know who he is. And it feels like for the first time ever, I see in actuality what I see in my head.
And there's so much longing too.
Yeah.
Like even as your daughter ages and as she sees more kids and older kids.
It's almost getting harder and worse. The more that she does, it's getting harder and worse, because I think in the beginning I knew, okay, well, this is what babies do, 1 month, 2 months, like I kind of like knew. But I didn't know I didn't know what it's like when they say the first word or their first step or whatever, and they're going to start doing math and reading books. And it's like, wait a minute, I lost all of that. Not only did I lose a baby who like will never have an avocado, like that's what I was so fixated on when Aiden died, that he's never going to have an avocado.
Yeah.
And he never laughed. But not only did I lose that, like I lost a child who will never go to a concert, who will never tell me he loves me. All these things that my daughter hopefully is going to get to do, like I now have to watch a front row seat and learn, because you don't know what you don't know. And we know like some of the milestones, but I don't think you and I could sit here and tell you what 5-year-olds do. Like we don't know. And it's so hard to have like more, as she ages, an acute awareness of what I lost.
Yeah, and especially it's so normal when you have multiple children to like compare and contrast their personalities and what they're interested in and what they're good at and what they hate and their preferences, and all of that is longing because you don't have any of that, and as every year that passes, there's going to be some things more that you figure out. Like for me, it's like, okay, maybe my second son, he'll really enjoy swimming. And it's like, well, would Zayn like swimming or would he not like swimming?
The same thing.
You don't know. And it's just this constant longing for all these experiences you will never get, which is why people don't understand that, the grief doesn't go away and it evolves and it changes, but it doesn't get better.
It doesn't get better. And yet we are doing better. I think you and I are doing better because we have live children who are doing well. I think we are better. We are in better headspace. We are just more joyful. There's more life in our eyes. Like we are doing better, even though things are still. You and I, this is an interesting thing about you and I. Okay, I'll say 2 observations. The first thing is that you and I would say, you and I spend more time talking about normal mom things than I spend talking about normal mom things with other moms. And it's almost because we have this like relatable experience that we don't have to explain that we're second time moms, that we should know this already. Like, because we already both understand that we're second time moms, there's more latitude for me to talk about teething and talk about like sleeping through the night and, sending, I don't know what we send, like little like tchotchkes that we find to make those pouches easier to eat.
Yeah.
Like, we spend more time doing that because there's this shared understanding that we're both competent, loving parents to 2 children. And I don't feel like I have to fight for people to remember that. That's the first thing. And then the second thing that I'll say is that I think a part that we're not talking about is like, we also talk a lot about how hard things are. Things are really hard. And we do not, I think in my head, I kind of imagine like moms after a loss, like, I imagine they talk more about like, what kind of food is your baby eating? And I don't think I realized how our lives are still really bad and really hard, and we talk about it all the time.
Yes, we have so much new happiness in our life, and there's a lot of things that we struggle with.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would have, being pregnant at the time, would have thought about all these things that I now struggle with to parent after loss. Just all the complicated feelings. And I will say, like you mentioned, having a community and people that you feel safe with to talk about, your authentic self, because I have some mom friends that have never experienced loss, and I feel super comfortable with them talking about, sleeping, and my son is now into like biting, and I can talk about them without, having any ill will or being like, well, you don't understand it because you don't have a dead child. And I think it comes down to, you have to surround yourself with people that you feel safe with, because it's so important to have that safe space to just be honest with your feelings, whatever they are, whatever that's like, you want to talk about what you're struggling with, or you want to talk about how great your day was with your living child.
Yeah. What else would you want to tell people who are pregnant right now? Like, what guidance or what is just something that you would want to share with them, talking to yourself a year ago?
You know what I want to share, but I don't even want to say it, because when people would say this to me, I get so mad. I remember when I was pregnant, I could not imagine. And even when I had my second son, like the newborn phase was really triggering for me, because that was like the first hit of, oh my God, this is what I lost. But you will feel happiness again. It's not going to just be sad all the time. There's going to be new sadness and there's going to be new struggles, but you will feel a new normal. That's not just feeling like the ball is going to drop, being alive is like a punishment, everything's awful. And, I remember people would say that to me, and I could never picture that for myself. I just thought that even parenting a living child, that I could, be happy with them, but not be happy again. And you're not going to be happy in the way that you were before you experienced what you did, but that doesn't mean you can't find some like new happiness and new normalcy. So
I also want to say that we have one alive child, one dead child. You and I both want more alive children. As you think about growing your family, like, what is the number one feeling that just kind of comes up to the surface? Like, immediately, like, what do you think of when I say, like, having more kids?
Doing this again.
Exactly. Oh my God, I'm so glad you said that, because I think the same thing. I mean, obviously I want more kids, but I'm like, oh my God, you want me to do that again? That was the hardest thing in the entire world. It was
real. I had like the day my second son was born, it was like the stress over that time, because it was just so stressful being pregnant, that I get how I was before I had my second son, where, I worry about more babies dying. I also worry about like family dynamics. I'm sure a lot of people talk about, if you have a boy that dies, what do you, if you have a boy again? What if you have a girl again? I think about like sibling dynamics. If we have, and so I think anytime you start thinking too much into the future and predicting, that it never leads you down a good hole. But
I'm
Yeah,
glad you said that. I think that's
I feel
honest.
very complicated about having to do this again. But then I always pictured myself with, two living kids, like kids who had siblings. I didn't
Yeah.
realize I needed to be specific at that moment, like two alive, like alive. Like I missed
Yeah.
that word when I was,
I totally missed that word too.
family planning. So
Yeah.
I don't know. What would you say is your biggest piece of advice for somebody who's transitioning potentially from being pregnant to being parenting after loss? There's almost like there is no advice. Even when
I
people
have
ask me
no
that about being
advice.
pregnant after
I
loss,
just would say this is so hard. This is so hard and so good. And I guess the only advice I have is to find other people, because I always think that when you share that heavy load amongst a community, it becomes lighter for everyone. That's like the only advice I could have. Find other people who can help you by understanding. They don't have to have the exact same loss, they don't have to have the exact same feelings, but just find someone who, when you're in their presence, you feel like you're not alone. That's
that's all you can do.
be hard, because it's hard. It's going to be hard. And I hope to God in the future it's easier. I just hope it gets
Yeah.
easier. The idea of having more kids, it was different for me because my son died of SIDS. So there was this whole component of sleeping,
Yes, we
every
didn't even talk
single
about
night.
that.
I know.
The
Every
anxiety
single night.
over thinking your
So much
child's dying.
anxiety over the child sleeping. Like, how do I sleep at night? Do I sleep at night? How is my child monitored when I sleep at night? How do I let my child sleep in someone else's home? Like, I would walk downstairs and find my daughter in the position my son died in. And all the time I would walk when she was little, I would walk downstairs and see her like in that same position with her arms up, and my heart would stop. And I would walk into her room and I would expect her to be dead with every fiber of my being. I would put my hand on the doorknob and I would be like, oh, I'm gonna go find her dead, but I have to go inside because I have to check on her or whatever it is. And I obsessively, my husband and I both, when we watch on the monitor, we zoom in so close so we can see her chest move. All the time I'm sitting there watching her breathing. And there's so much PTSD with just this idea of sleep. There are times where I'll be like, well, if she's dead already, she's dead already. I mean, nothing I can do about it now. I literally will sit in my office, be working on a work project, know that it's about time for her to wake up on her nap, and I'm scared to check. But then I tell myself, Judith, she's dead. There's nothing you can do. She's dead already. So let's just check the monitor. And every single time I let out a sigh of okay, she's alive. I do not feel calm or confident in the fact that she's going to wake up in the morning ever. I do not have that. I don't have that confidence. I continue to live in a place where I'm shocked every time it happens.
Yeah, you need like an episode just dedicated to the feelings of thinking your child's dead all the time.
All the time.
Because you as a SID mom, that makes perfect sense. And other moms struggle with that in different ways because that's kind of all you know is a child dying.
That is all I know, is that you give birth and then they die. And then what happens is your body goes through this roller coaster. And I think part of the reason I'm so drained and so exhausted is because I'm constantly in fight or flight. Constantly. Well, now it's better now that she's older, but for the first 6 months, it's like am I not sleeping at night, I'm constantly in this roller coaster of building myself up to just check on her, and then the relief, and then building myself up to check on her, and then the relief that she's still alive. It's exhausting.
For you, is it just sleeping, or do you struggle with that? Like if you're away from her and she's I don't know, on a car ride to the grocery store without you, say with your partner.
Then I do. Then weirdly, if I'm out of town and I'm not home, I am so much better. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. I think for me, it's the responsibility of keeping a child alive. I remember when I was pregnant, the entire time I was pregnant, I could not breathe because I felt solely responsible for keeping her alive. And so I couldn't sleep at night because if I slept at night and she died on my watch, it was my responsibility. And if I'm not home, it's not my responsibility to keep her alive. And so I feel like I can finally relax. But if I'm in the house, it is my responsibility. And that's exhausting.
It is exhausting. And I'm wondering if anyone ever tried to compare those feelings to what first moms experience, because thinking your child died is a common first child experience. And I remember actually someone said that to me, and I got really hurt that they said that, because I was having some anxiety over my second son and him dying. And they told me, well, that's just like what moms experience.
Oh my
And
God.
I
Well, I can
remember,
tell you because I've been a first-time mom for the first time and I've been a first-time mom for the second time. So I can tell you, I did go over to Aiden and put my finger under his nose and to feel his breath. I did go check his chest to see if it was rising, falling. I did watch the monitor. But the difference is I wasn't mentally preparing myself for the fact that he was dead.
the second time around, you're preparing because you're basing that off not hypothetical situations, but lived
Actuality.
experiences.
And the
Yeah.
first time around, it was like, I think I would check, but I would check without fear. Like I wasn't afraid yet. Does that
Like
make
you
any
had
sense?
a body, yeah.
Like I was anxious about it. I was anxious for sure. But I wasn't like feeling in my bones the feeling of you can't breathe, of PTSD. I wasn't.
Yeah, you're having a physical
Yeah,
reaction because it's bringing up, you know,
100%.
PTSD and those experiences that you have had, not these imaginary things that may
Yes.
happen.
And it's not only that, but I also imagine this. Okay, I'm sitting there trying to open the door. Like you have to understand, every time I open the door, this is what's running through my mind. It's not just, am I going to find her dead? It's like, okay, what color will she be? I know her skin will be gray. What's going to happen when the police are going to come? These are things that run through my mind. Okay, well, what police are going to ask what I was doing? What was I doing? Oh, I was working. Okay, you were working. Okay, so when the police come and ask you what happened, you can say you were working. And then I'm sitting there, when was the last time she ate? Because the police are going to want to know when was the last time she ate. And then I'm thinking, all of this is happening in the span of 1 second while I open the door. Where am I going to bury her? Of course, I have to bury her in Los Angeles, but I'm here in Maryland. So where am I, it's 25 million things that you can only think about if you've lived through the experience once. And all of that is happening in the span of 1 second when I open the door. So it is not at all like when I would check on Aiden breathing, because when I would check on Aiden breathing, like I was like looking for his breath, but I was not imagining him dead. And I wasn't sitting there being like, well, how am I going to live without him? I was not that far in my mind, it never got that far in my head. But when you know what it looks like, it's possible to go so much further. You know so much more. So imagine that entire racing thoughts that I just described, 4, 5, 6 times a day? It's a lot. It's a lot.
Hard. That's why it's exhausting.
That's why it's
mentally,
exhausting.
physically. And that's coming off of already, a pregnancy that was really mentally hard. Like,
my husband,
and that's coming off of, a woman whose baby just died. I mean, it's a buildup, and how I think one of the areas
I have nothing left in my cup to begin with. In the beginning, I had nothing. When I was pregnant, I had nothing, and I had to go through pregnancy on fumes. Then I had a baby, and I had nothing in my cup to give, and I had to go through the newborn stage on fumes. And then I have nothing to give. I'm so burnt out to begin with. And I think that just makes parenting so much more difficult, because you're constantly being asked to give of yourself to this like living child.
And then whatever other life stresses you have.
Exactly.
Top of that. And it's
pretty fucked up.
Really, really hard. It's really fucked up. It's really fucked up. And that's why when you think about doing it again,
I'm just like, oh.
Yeah.
Anyway, this was lovely.
Yeah, this was fun. We need
to
do this again.
Yes. Well, you're invited back on the podcast whenever you want. And I want to do an episode with you talking about pregnancy. So we can talk about all these feelings of pregnancy that we kind of just had a little teaser about. But for now, I'm hopeful that this kind of makes a lot more women at home feel a little less lonely and a little more seen. Thank you so much, Kate.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And let's get together before the birthdays and death days.
Yes,
no birthday. The birth and death days for you, and just the death days and birthday for me.
Yep, exactly.
To all of our wonderful new friends, we want to hear from you. Email us at aslongasimlivingpodcast@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram at aslongasimlivingpodcast. We'll get back to you as soon as our grieving brains allow.
Yay!